Alright, so here I'm in Ableton and I have my trusty iRig pads controller, and I could do things such as turn this knob to select different scenes, and I could even press it to launch a scene, and then I could stop my clips with these buttons right here, or maybe I just want to launch individual clips. I could use these 4 buttons here, launch this one, and then the other 2 as well, and then I could stop them. I could mute or unmute my tracks like this, and then on this row here I have tempo tab, nudge down, nudge up, and I can toggle between the device and the clip view. And if I toggle back to the device view here, I could control my 1st and my 5th macro with these 2. Then by switching to my next scene, I can control the 2nd and the 6th, and so on and so forth. Right? And if I actually show you the X fader, I can control that with my fader here. And then if I switch over to this group of scenes here, all of the assignments to these buttons have changed. I can play my drum recs, and even if I select a different group of pads, as you can see, my pads here always control the ones highlighted. So you might think, wow, you got some crazy MIDI assignments going on, right? Well, let me show you. I have 0 MIDI assignments here, and that is because I use a control surface script. So if I open my preferences and go to MIDI, you have the option to select up to 6 control surfaces. And if you own any one of these, then you're in luck, because you don't need to do anything else. You can just select it and you're good to go. But if, like me, you are out of luck, like as you can see, the only iRig controller that has a pre-made control surface script that ships with Ableton is the Keys IO. No love for the iRig pads, which means I had to create my own. And the beauty of that is you can customize every single control. And unlike your Ableton MIDI assignments, which are project-based, meaning that for every new project you need to redo them, these, as you can see, will work across projects no matter what. So, okay, things to know. So your MIDI scripts are actually nothing more than a collection of text files which have to be placed into a certain folder so that Ableton can read them. So how do we get those and how do we customize them? So there's 3 steps, and I didn't come up with this. I've watched Potato Milk's video on this. So apparently there's this guy, Hans Petrov, who did create a set of custom scripts for his own controller, which I believe was an Akai MPC 40. Then Potato Milk, credit to him, he has taken those scripts and changed them in such a way that they were editable by you and me, so that we could customize them to work with not just the MPC 40, but whatever MIDI controller, right? And the problem, as you can probably see from the title of this video, is that his scripts only work in Live 9 and 10. And that is because the programming language those scripts are written in is Python 2. But Ableton Live 11 works with Python 3. So those are not going to be compatible. So what I did is I simply downloaded those scripts. I downloaded Python 3 and I used the conversion utility to convert those scripts into Python 3 so that they would work with Live 11. And then I've uploaded them to my GitHub repository so that you can download them and you don't have to go through the whole process yourself, right? So visit this address right here. I'm going to put the link in the description box. And by the way, you know, I've literally, all I did is I converted those scripts so that they would work with Live 11. So all credit goes to Laidlaw42, which is the same guy that uploaded the video. And I've reached out to him and I've said to him, you know, I'd be fine with removing these and just sending you the files so that you could update them on your GitHub. And whenever he gets back to me, if this is what's going to happen, then this link is probably not going to work anymore. So I'll update the link in the description box so that it brings you to Laidlaw42's GitHub and you can download the files from there. I've got you covered, is what I'm trying to say. Good, so in the meantime, what you can do is you can download these as a zip file, right? I'm gonna drag this to my desktop, extract our files, and this is what it will look like. And here's where the fun starts. Obviously the name of this is going to change. We're going to input the actual name of the MIDI controller we're using. And even if you open the folder, you can see there's a file here that's called your controller name as well. That is going to change too. And within some of these files, as you can see, there is some text that says your controller name, and we're going to change that too. But in order for us to make all of those changes, we first need to know the exact name of our controller as Ableton perceives it. So Let me open Live again. When I go to your preferences, have your MIDI controller connected, and this is the piece of information you need. So you gotta be very careful when copying this. You gotta keep capital letters capital, lowercase letters lowercase, and whenever there is a space, you don't want to put in a space, you want to put in an underscore. So the name of my controller is iRig Pads, and knowing that, I can start by renaming this folder. Good, so I'm actually gonna copy that as well, because the next step is to rename this file right here, right? Like that. Good. Now, the only files that we need to bother with are these 3 files right here. The other ones you can completely ignore. And what we need to do with these 2 is we need to replace all the parts where it says your controller name with the actual name of your controller. So let's start with this one. As you can see, it's a very small file. You can open it with whatever text editor you have. If you're on Windows, I would suggest opening it with WordPad because it has a find and replace function, which I'm going to use here as well. I'm going to press Command F and I'm going to select replace, and here you put in the part that you want to look for and replace, and down here I'm going to put iRig Pads. As you can see, it found 3 results. You can replace all of them. Boom, that was it. Save. Close. Same thing on this file right here. Open it, Command F, replace, iRig Pads, all done, save. And we're good to go. And this is where the real fun begins, because now we can take a closer look at the MIDI map file. And this one, as you can see, is much easier. On the right side are your functions. If I move this a little to the side, the play function is nothing else but this green triangle, right? Stop is this one. You got rec, which is of course the circle here. You got tap tempo, which is somewhere here. All different functions that you are used to. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. And then on all of those, by default, it says -1, which is kind of a placeholder. It means that that function isn't linked to any MIDI note or control. You can edit this depending on what kind of notes and controls, CCs I mean, your controller sends. So if, say, this pad right here was mapped to MIDI note number 10, and I wanted to connect that to the play function, I would just simply type in 10 and be good to go. Good. I'm going to show you my own mapping file in just a second to show you exactly what assignments I made and how they work. But now let's suppose we were done editing this. The next step is you need to put this folder into a specific folder for Ableton to be able to read those. And so I don't know exactly where that is on Windows, but it should be pretty easy to figure out. Probably program files or something like that. On Mac, you want to go to your applications folder, right click on Ableton, Live, show package contents, open contents, app resources, and down here you have the MIDI remote scripts. And my folder isn't actually called iRig Pads, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. If you're interested, I can do an extra tutorial, but basically that is because, as you can see, I'm using Subtlesoft's MIDI pipe, and the iRig Pads is just one of several inputs. I have my Blueboard as well. There we go. And further down in my pipe, I have the MIDI Master, which is this little guy that allows me to connect my guitar to Ableton via Bluetooth MIDI. And then finally, my output is called MIDI Pipe Output 1. And so that is the reason why I didn't call my folder and my files iRig Pads, but as you can see, MIDI Pipe Output 1 instead. But you know, if you don't have this complexity here going on, you can just, you know, stick with the name of your controller. So you put it into this folder. Ignore this for now. We'll get back to that later. So in Ableton's preferences, as you can see, I have selected MIDI Pipe Output 1 as the control surface, and then you want to select it as the input as well. And that is pretty much it. Now let's have a look at my mappings here. So this is interesting right here. TSB, X, and Y. So this is the track selection box, and this is the width of it, and this is the height of it. So if I go back into Ableton, as you can see, I have 4 clips, and if I move my box, that is how it stays. I know 4 isn't much, but as you can see, I have a 4x4 pad controller here, so that is what works best for me. If you have an 8x8 controller, then you would probably want to set this to 8 and this, you know, to whatever suits your needs. Good. Then these are pretty much self-explanatory. As you can see, I have tap tempo, nudge up and nudge down. Mapped, I removed the -1 part and I added the MIDI notes that I wanted to control them, which would be this pad for the tempo, this for nudge down, and this for nudge up. Then here you have clip track view, which toggles between clip and track view on this pad. This one is sending out MIDI note number 4, and so 4 is what I wrote in here. These I ignored. This is interesting too. So scene up and scene down and session up and session down are actually assigned to the same control. So when I move this to the right, I generate MIDI note 6, which means downwards. Both the scene selection and our track selection box, right? They both go together. Doesn't have to be that way. You can unlink those by assigning them to different MIDI notes, but you know, why not? It makes sense to me that it looks like this. Then I have used track left and right. I have assigned those to these two buttons because these two send out MIDI notes number 7 and 8. So that is what I wrote in here, right? 7 and 8. Good, good. What else do we have here? I have a selected scene launch button, which is when I press this data knob here, I can launch a full scene. Stop that, and so on and so forth. Now this is interesting too. If you have one of those 8x8 controllers, right? So you have 8 rows of 8 pads each, and you know the MIDI notes they send out, which you probably should, right? Then you can put in here those MIDI note values so that every single one of your pads launches a certain clip. That is pretty cool as well, I think. In my case, not worth using it because I only have 4x4 pads. Good, good. And then, oh, this is very important too. This is the track stop function, and you can assign it to up to 8 tracks at a time. If I had more than 8 tracks, I could move to the right and my selection would then capture the next 8 tracks. Nothing I worry about because I'm on live light, so at most I can have 8 tracks anyway, even though there's a bunch of workarounds and I have tons of videos about that. So check them out if you're interested. Notice how I went 11, 12, 13, 14 for the first 4 tracks, which are the ones I'm controlling, and then I used 0. And that is because if I had left these set to -1, then the whole track stop function would not have worked. Whenever you assign one of those, the other ones need to be assigned to a valid MIDI note as well. So in my case, I decided that I would sacrifice and use as a placeholder MIDI note 0. None of my controls here is set to 0, and so that's a note I'll never use. I just use it as a placeholder for these. But I use 11, 12, 13, and 14 to stop my tracks. Then I use 15, 16, 17, and 18 to select different tracks. Actually, this is why I'm using MIDI pipe, some MIDI magic going on there, so that whenever my controller actually sends out these MIDI notes, MIDI pipe will also trigger, where is it? Yes, the selected clip launch. So it will also trigger MIDI note 10. And if you're interested, I can show you how that works, but it kind of goes beyond the scope of this tutorial. So let me know in the comments and I'll show you how to do that as well. But the way this works is, as you can see, whenever I press my pad, and I'm going to keep it pressed, as you can see, track number 2 is being selected. But when I release, it also sends MIDI note number 10, which is going to trigger whatever clip I have on it. And I can do the same by pressing this button right here, selects track number 4, and launches on release whatever clip I have on track number 4. Good, good. Then I have track mute. This is very useful as well in live situations. It's the pads down here. And the interesting thing is I've programmed them in such a way that whenever a track is muted, these stay lit. And so I know, like visually, immediately, I know all of my tracks are muted. I don't even have to look at my screen, and then I can unmute them like this. And again, explaining exactly how this works is very specific to the iRig pads. So if you're interested, again, shoot me a comment. I'll be happy to explain. But if you don't have this specific controller, you're gonna kind of have to figure out on your own how that works with yours. But yeah, let's continue here. You could assign track solo, track rack. I didn't bother doing any of those. This is pretty cool as well. These are the drum pads for Ableton's drum racks, right? And here you can input the exact MIDI notes that your pads are assigned to, and it will make it so that no matter what these notes are, your pads will always control whatever group of pads you have selected in Ableton, like I showed you before. If I select this, it says here E2, F2, but those notes won't matter because these are now mapped to my pads, to my notes which I inputted here. So, you know, I need to switch to my second preset here, and as you can see, I can control all of the pads, and even if I move up to this group of pads here, again, regardless of the notes, I can control all of those pads. And just a quick mention of my presets. Those are the scenes on my iRig pads, and these are basically 2 macro presets. The first row is a preset, the second row is a preset. And then they have 4 micro presets, so to speak, each. And I'll show you in just a second why that is. But for now, you know, this is equivalent to this and this and this, and this one is equivalent to these 3 as well. On this one, I have my controls to stop, launch, and all the things I showed you before, right? Whereas in my first presets, I have the drum rack notes to trigger my drum racks. Good, so up until now, all of these controls you could assign by using MIDI notes, right? My pads send out MIDI note messages. But then, from here on out, where it says sliders and knobs, now we're talking MIDI CCs, so control changes, continuous controls, whatever CC stands for. So by using CCs, we can control things such as, you know, your project's tempo. I could have mapped my slider to the tempo, for instance, and then moving the slider up would increase the tempo and moving it down would decrease the tempo. I could set a tempo limit, both an upper limit and a lower limit, and it's explained here as well. So it's very easy to edit and understand this document here. I went for a different approach and assigned my slider here to the crossfader control. As you can see, my slider here sends out MIDI CC 87, so I rose in 87, and it controls the X slider here, which is useful for DJing. Then you could control the track volume, track panning, track sends. This is pretty cool. You could actually use the slider to control the track volume and maybe these 2 little knobs to control your sends. You could create kind of a studio workflow. Me personally, I have a live workflow in this, and so I use these 2 to control something else, which is down here, parameter control. So let me show you how that works. And that is the reason why my 2 main presets are divided into 4 sub presets each. The reason is I have 2 of these knobs, and on each sub preset the MIDI CC that they send out changes. Everything else stays the same. So if I'm on preset 1, these are still going to send out MIDI notes to trigger my drum rack pads, and if I'm on preset 2, these are still going to be the MIDI notes that trigger launching clips and stopping them and the mute function and all of that. But within those macro presets, the assignment of these 2 knobs is going to change. The reason is pretty simple. Look at this. On the first micro preset, I can control these 2 macros right here. On the second micro preset, I control the next macros. On the third micro preset, I control these and these as well. And the same goes for my first preset. As you can see, there we go. So you don't need to worry about that if you have 8 of these knobs at your disposal on your MIDI controller. But if you don't, this is a neat little trick to turn these 2 into 8. And so what I would do is I would, use whatever device or audio effect, right? And then I would map the function I want to control live to those macros, right? So I could assign, for instance, the frequency to macro 1, and then the resonance. If I want to control it at the same time, it would have to be macro number 5, right? So I can use them at the same time. And then maybe I want to assign the filter type to macro number 2 and the slope to macro number 6. There we go. Oops, I gotta switch to the second micro preset, and now I can control the filter type and the slope, right? And the reason why I use macros for this is because, as you can see, my controls here are clearly labeled. There's no confusion. Whereas if I was to remove this, put in my auto filter, now this is the device I would control with my knobs, but I have no idea what my knobs are actually controlling. So I have to kind of try. So this controls the filter frequency, but this controls the LFO amount. How was I to know that? There's no way. So it's best to use macros for that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. One last thing I want to mention, this pycache folder here. So this folder you don't have at the moment, right? You only have these text files. So you know what? I'm gonna quit Ableton Ableton. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to put it on the desktop. So this is the kind of situation that you guys are in at the moment. So what Ableton will do upon relaunch is it will read these files and create the pycache folder. And then from that moment on, it will reference that folder as opposed to these files. Okay? And what that means is that if you ever want to change an assignment, then simply changing it here in MIDI map isn't going to do the trick, because Ableton again is not going to reference these. It will only reference pycache, which was created at the time you hadn't made your change. So what you need to do is you need to delete pycache with Ableton not running, make your change, launch Ableton again. Ableton will notice that the py folder isn't there. It will read these again, recreate its own folder, and that folder is now going to contain your update as well. So yeah, that was it. I hope this was helpful, and if there's anything more you would like to know about this, be it, MIDI pipe or, whatever, just let me know in the comments. And yeah, that being said, I'll see you next week on another video. Take care.